name is Aki, and I have a home in Australia. The question here lies is who has home in Australia? My team and I decided to get on the roads of Australia and ask people the real questions that people should be knowing about the word refugee. Do you know the difference between asylum seekers and refugees? Do you know whether refugees are kept in Australia? How long does a refugee stay in refugee camps before getting granted a visa to stay in Australia? Would you rather, situation 1, be with your loved ones in an unsafe country, or situation 2, be without your loved ones in a safe island? If you knew there was a way to support or sponsor a refugee, would you volunteer to do so? If yes, why? And if no, why?
Asylum seeker is someone seeking safety in another country, and refugee, someone who's been under that convention thing.
Technically, there isn't much difference because they're both asylum seekers or a former refugee.
Some people are there for like years and other people never get their visas.
Well, I believe it's off the northeast coast. I'm not exactly sure the name, but it's a small island there.
Yes, because I'm from a country with lots of refugees, so I do understand. But it also depends on what the situation is. I'll see according to the context, yeah.
Ah, yes. Asylum seekers are actually fleeing from some conflict in their homeland. Refugees can be completely different. There can be humanitarian refugees. There can be people who voluntarily and through legitimate channels actually move from one country to another. So they're completely separate, yeah. They're not in Australia. So refugees, is that what you're saying? Or,
Yeah, so where are they kept?
Well, they're kept offshore to Camps Nauru, and the other one just closed. So, what's the second one? Manus Island. Refugees, what to say? Depends if they're asylum seekers or if they're illegal refugees. It can be indeterminate. It could be one day. It could be 5 years, or they could arrive at the airport and legitimately settle in next week. So, the question is, as you say, a trick. I think I'd have to, well, if I was in that situation, you'd like to imagine you'd stay with your family and look for some way out of that island rather than ending up on an island, yeah. That's a good question. Well, I have thought about it several occasions of sort of help kids through those type of fundraising initiatives. We do those type of things. It would depend what you're actually doing. Are you donating money to a particular organisation? I think a lot of Australians are very wary of those organisations. I think most of us tend to donate money to church-based organisations and things like that because we tend to trust them a bit more. I think most Australians like to seek a lot more information before we put our money anywhere, and in this particular case would be exactly one of those cases. So yes, but we'd ask a lot of questions.
A welcoming community has been shown to be of critical importance to refugees by their host country. So our research looked at how refugees are settling in southeast Queensland and how they're getting along with their neighbours or colleagues and so on. Refugees come from a very collectivist background. Often their neighbours are their family, and they'll drop their kids off at their neighbour's house. So when they arrive in Australia, the situation can be quite shocking and quite different. So, and refugees are often settling in very low socioeconomic areas. So the neighbors that they do have or the colleagues that they do have are sometimes not as welcoming as we would hope. And basically what we found was that either people's neighbors were being simply not saying hello or not responding, not being very welcoming, I guess, or they were being quite rude. We heard from people whose neighbors would call the police on them because their food smelled bad or yell at their children. So these were their micro experiences which really affected how they viewed Australia and how they felt welcomed in Australia. And many of them also experienced some discrimination at work, which was quite unfortunate. So yeah, this was basically quite unfortunate that this was the experience they were having with their neighbours, their first kind of welcome to Australia.
My name's Ali Alair. I was born in a Kenya refugee camp. My family fled to Sudan. Well, there was a lot of things going on back there with war and things like that. So Mum had enough of that, and we were able to settle in the refugee camp, and that's where me and my younger brother were born. I guess my memory from the refugee camp was just being around family. I think there's one specific memory that I remember quite well, which is making a soccer ball out of a balloon. We were able to get a balloon, blow it up, get some old shirt, rip them apart and tie them around until it's a perfect soccer ball. And I think we'll make a few of those just in case one popped. I think it wasn't until 2003 we were granted a visa to come over here. My memory coming to Australia was very different. It wasn't the same thing that I've seen. You rock up at Sydney Airport, you see all these buildings, things that I never saw in the refugee camp were surreal to me. Like I didn't even know they existed. Having a fridge. There wasn't such a thing as a fridge. And my greatest memory was probably just getting granted that visa, my whole family here, and getting that citizenship. Now we call ourselves, African Australian, and Australia has become our home. They've welcomed in with both arms.
The media love to use the word crisis to describe some of the issues surrounding refugees and asylum seekers in Australia, which is quite unfortunate because the issue really has not reached the level of crisis depending on where you're coming from. Within Australia, the number of people who arrive by boat is very low. Obviously that number has gone down to basically zero in the past few years, but even when it was at its peak, the numbers were much less than what we've been seeing in places like Europe or the borders in South of America. So the number of people who actually come by boat is very low compared to those who seek asylum by plane. So the issue has been totally blown out of proportion, and people are using the word crisis and really feeling like there's this major threat of people who come by boat. So the language that we use is very important, and the language that the media use to describe things can really inflate or exaggerate situations that are not actually the case.
I think they deserve a place in the world the same as everybody else.
We've just got such a big country and lots of space. I think we just have to be kind in terms of the rest of the world, that's all.
I think we have a responsibility to do something for them as soon as we were involved in the war. We can't turn our back on responsibility when we were previously involved.
I think we all have to think in terms of the one world, one humanity. And we all have international obligations to fulfill if it's going to be a peaceful world for everybody.
What about the racial tension that might well be created here as a result?
Well, I think that we have to implement new education schemes into the schools to change people's attitudes and their prejudice.
Well, we fought in Vietnam, So I think it's fair enough that we should have some sort of responsibility.
If Australia has an economy that can support that kind of activity, I don't see anything wrong with it. If it's going to be a burden on the economy and you really don't have the facility to support them, I don't think it's a good deal.
A lot of Australians are saying we should look after ourselves first.
I disagree with that. That's an isolationist philosophy.
When it came down to making decision to choose between safe alone or unsafe with your family, people couldn't make the decision. But this was a hypothetical situation for them. But there are thousands of people who have to make a choice every day. So next time, if you meet a refugee, remember to pause and ask if you could do anything to help them out. They are humans too and deserve equal human rights. Let's make greater efforts to help refugees to make home in Australia.